And I think definitely the focus should be on what is it that will make for a better experience? What is it that is going to make for a better game, a more fun game, a better experience for the player?
In this episode of the Fika Sessions, we meet lead game designer Andrada Greciuc to find out all we can about being a game designer for video games. Hi, Andrada.
Hey!
Hey, welcome.
Thank you.
You brought Fika.
I did.
These actually have names, like actual person names.
Yeah, they do. I don't know them by this name, so I don't know why they're called. They're called Sarah Bernhardt on the label here.
Yeah, I don't think you can see it from there, but this little
one
name
is
tags.
The other way.
Why?
I have no idea, but I think they're also called the Biscuit in Swedish.
Yep.
That's the name I know.
Yeah, and they're filled with this cream kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't. Is it hazelnut? I don't know. It's just the best. To me, it's the best Fika.
They're really, really good. So you work here at Massive Entertainment as lead game designer.
I do.
On a top level, because it feels like the words game designer is one of those things that are really easy if you're outside the industry to romanticize. Like,
yeah.
Oh, that person is a game designer. The person designs games. But really, on a kind of top level, what does a game designer do?
Yeah, you're right. I think a lot of people think that game designers their job is to kind of have ideas and like just dream some cool game experience. And there's a bit of truth in that. I think a game designer's sort of main mission is to make sure that the game is fun.
Yep.
And that can take a lot of shapes. It can be that, you feel immersed or transfixed to another world, or that you feel curious, or that you feel you have that sort of childlike wonder in the game, or that you feel challenged by this like obstacle that is kind of making you learn and grow, and then you master it and you beat the game. It can be feeling curious or smart because the game gave you options that are interesting and you felt like you could kind of use your mind. So so I think it's depending on what the game you're making and the intention that you have behind how you want to make those players feel.
Yeah.
You decide what type of design and what types of systems you want to put in, and what the actual sort of journey and adventure that you want to take them on. But I think it starts off a little bit there with like, okay, what do I want my players to experience?
Yeah.
And then sort of the less fluffy answer would be that like at Massive, we make open world games, pretty huge open world games where you control a character. So that kind of informs a little bit the types of disciplines or the types of aspects of the game that we have to cover with game design. And that actually results into design disciplines or sub-disciplines, however you want to call them. And, we have 3 C's. I'll go into that in a second. We have AI. We have all sorts of systems design. We have progression design. But basically, in a nutshell, game designer at Massive is usually somebody that invents and designs rules for how the player interacts with the game, with the game world, and also how the different ingredients of the game interact with each other. So that is kind of what we take care of. And then to go back into the sort of the disciplines, we have 3 C's, which I think is a Ubisoft terminology. Which stands for camera, controls, and character. So it's basically the craft of making you feel like you are your virtual avatar,
right?
Like making that gap between you as a physical person and the character you're controlling as small as possible, and you saying things like, "Oh, I jumped over this." You clearly didn't, but it's I think it's that craft, and it's super important in our games and very difficult, I think, from not being a 3C designer. Then we have AI design. We usually have like what we call NPCs, non-playing characters, which usually have behaviors and they do things in the game. They can be your enemies, they can be hostile, they can be friendly, they can be wildlife. So those designers that work with AI design invent basically behaviors for them, how they interact again when the player does certain things, how they interact with each other. So a lot of like work on the different types of NPCs and the how they're different, how they're varied, how. Then we have more generic system design that basically tries to cover like all the things that you can do in the game. Is your game a shooting game? Is your game, in a game in which you craft or you build things? How does that happen? What are the rules basically of how the player engages with that? Makes that basically in the game, interacts in the game with those systems. And then of course, how do they fit in with the rest of the big puzzle?
Yep.
And finally, progression. That's what I've been working with mostly, especially here at Massive. It's usually trying to look at the bigger, like the sort of the journey the player takes throughout the adventure that is the game,
right? And
basically how our systems evolve over time. How does the player evolve over time? How do we deal with difficulty? How do we deal with introducing new sort of concepts to the player to keep it interesting and engaging, but also with like making sure the players have medium and long-term goals, so that they can kind of just feel like they have a little bit of control. And we, at least in our games, we really like to give a lot of autonomy to our players. So we work a lot with this type of player goals, making sure the players can plan out kind of what they want to do and how they want to play. And so that's kind of in a nutshell how I see game design. In a nutshell, how I see in a nutshell of 4 disciplines, how I see game design. And I think we're lucky because we can afford to have pretty large game design teams and have this type of specialization within game design.
Yeah, AAA development is huge. But before, because there's a lot of stuff to unpack in there.
Sorry.
Just get back to, how did you end up at Massive Entertainment?
I came over from another Ubisoft studio, actually, which is in Bucharest, where I'm from originally. And so I came over 9 years ago to work on The Division, the first Division game. And I worked as a progression designer for the longest time and keep doing that, I think, to this day, actually. I previously worked as a game designer in Bucharest. I worked as a mobile game designer for a while as well, in a company that was kind of part of Ubisoft, or at least the sister company of Ubisoft. I got into games quite early when I was 19, and I've worked for Ubisoft related companies this entire time. So I can speak for Ubisoft game design experience mostly, but it's
But did you have any form of education or anything when you came in? You just jumped straight into the industry?
There wasn't that opportunity. And I was kind of lucky to get like almost like a part-time job to help out in the studio. And then I got really hooked on what they were doing. And then I was offered like a writing job because I was pretty good in English. So I was writing just like kind of copywriting for some games and apps. And then I got into game design. And so I kind of learned by doing. And I failed a lot, quite a lot. So that was kind of like, there was no education available. I think it's still quite little in terms of game development education in Bucharest, but it's starting to become a big thing, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's been so interesting sitting down with people like this and just hearing the different ways people get into the industry. It's just so different. Either straight in or they go these long paths around. It's really fascinating to hear.
I think and for game design, I think it's a lot of people also coming from testing or from production, like producers or project coordinators. So it's like you have these sort of paths in that you can kind of recognize. And I mean, I think lately in the last, I don't know, maybe decade, it's been more and more people coming with formal education. which I think is very cool.
Do you see a change kind of over these? You've been with Ubisoft for 9 years, but in like general, what do you think your field? How has it changed during this time?
I think it's also I think it maybe I'm wrong, but from my experience, it's very much depends a little bit on the studio as well, a bit as well. What you like, how the role is perceived. I think like it's evolved from a less hands-on to a more hands-on type of role, at least in terms of how much you work in engine.
Right.
It was more of a ideation, documentation, communication type role, I think, at the beginning, and now I think it's a lot more of an there's a lot more done in engine by game designers.
Right.
They prototype things themselves. It's a lot easier to get into that type of work as a game designer than it used to be, for sure. So that's a change I see. I think also, like at Massive, we see game designers having a lot of ownership and being empowered to make decisions about the game, and as long as they follow of course a creative vision, which I think is also something that we've evolved into, which is a good thing for the games moving forward quickly and getting into a state where we can look at them.
We're going to get back to that puzzle of various disciplines after a while, but on a daily basis, just in your job, how do you view your work, and what do you actually do?
Right. I think it depends a bit on the stage of the project or the game development sort of process. Usually we get we define an intention. This is what we want to achieve. This is the experience that we are after. And usually creative directors in general are a big part of defining that intention.
Yeah. And
we get a creative work frame basically to kind of design in. And so when that is kind of done, we usually start getting into the details, and that's kind of like the ideation part for a game designer, where they go and they prototype things to try things out to see what would work, what wouldn't, and usually we also document a solution to this to this intention or design goals that we set out to achieve, and we do that in a design document.
The design document is interesting.
Pain.
Because we talk now about working in the engine and actually like practically building stuff that way. But there's still a lot of, as you say, documentation and an actual design document.
I think it's important to do. It's not maybe the most fun for everyone. Some designers, I think, use it as part of their process. They use it to structure their ideas and to see kind of the experience on paper. But I think for some designers, it's not the most fun part.
How does it usually look like? Because we talked about fun before, which is a whole Fika session in itself, basically. Yeah. But how do you transfer fun into text? Because it's fairly, as far as I've understood it from discussions we've had earlier, it's quite technical.
You can't really prove it on paper, and we don't actually expect to be right or have all the answers on paper. Actually, I think the design documentation or that design phase on paper or in theory that we do is mostly to make sure that we have a plan.
Right.
So we don't set out to implement with the larger team without having, some idea of what we're trying to build. And I think also what it does is that it puts you a little bit in front of all the issues or the problems that might arise. So you might be able to solve some things already at that stage. You have to discover them later and be faced with them later.
Right.
It's also important to do this in order to have this sort of alignment with the rest of the project. Like make sure that your plan fits with the big plan and the rest of the little plans that everybody has.
Yeah.
So that's another reason to put it down on paper. But a lot of the time, it's not gonna stick. Like you're gonna make changes. A lot of the time is not what it actually ships. Right. So, and that's fine. We're okay with that. There's no problem. Nobody's expected to ship what's on that. It would actually be weird. Probably you would be very brilliant, and I'm sure people maybe are that brilliant sometimes, but I haven't seen it happen yet.
There's all these, like, I keep just so much on a bigger, again going back to bigger, because I still want to talk about these like systems, how they interact, but You mentioned the creative framework.
Yeah.
Like, how does a game designer work within, because you get the creative vision from like creative directors and producers and stuff. How do you then take that and put it into your work?
So usually, there's some pillars defined. Sometimes you might have something a little bit more detailed, like still pretty high level in terms of like what the expectations are from the feature, in terms of like the information. But usually like you get pretty high level pillars of like, we want to achieve this. We don't want to be that. We want to be this. And in that sort of creative vision, there are several solutions, several options you can take. And I think that's where the game designer comes in and makes a decision.
Yeah.
So as long as those pillars and those goals are met, the design document will show that. And that's usually what is submitted for approval. So we have kind of a check-in with the creative direction to make sure that they are on board with our plan, and that our plan actually respects that creative framework. So so that's kind of where we make sure that that happens. And it is part of the game designer's job to make sure that what they design make sense in that framework. And sometimes it might not be what you prefer. You might not agree with those pillars 100%. Maybe you think other pillars are more important, but you have to. That's part of the the job. You have to be creative in those constraints.
Yep. And
find the joy in solving the problems in that context. So.
Yep. It's a word that keeps coming back as well as alignment,
yeah.
Which is definitely we go to all these different disciplines.
Yeah.
And you create these systems. First, how would you define a system?
I think it's a hard thing to define. I thought about it a bit. To me, it's a set of rules, or and it depends a little bit on what type of system we're talking about. It can be a system that deals with certain ingredients in the game, or it can be a system that just defines rules that or interactions that the player can do in order to achieve an outcome. Like if we're doing crafting, okay, what are the ins, what are the outs? What do we put the focus on? Do we want to have the focus on finding the materials, or do we want to have the focus on the player being creative in that crafting loop? So based on what your goals are and what the system is, we define exactly the rules that govern what the player can do.
Yep.
And so I think to me it's a rule set and of how your various ingredients interact with each other and how the player can fiddle with them basically, or interact with them basically. So yes. Sorry, not the clearest, but
no. It makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. And I mean, then you have your system.
Yeah.
And then you have other systems that other people are working on. And this is where it kind of gets, to me, kind of mind-blowing how all of these things manage to fit together as a whole.
Yeah.
But how do you actually do that work? You have a team working on the crafting. You have a team working on the even combat or AI or whatever. How do these kind of...
It is definitely challenging, but I think we have process in place to align. And for example, one way we align early on is through peer reviewing our game design documents, like making sure that our game designs or sanity checking them. I have an idea that affects tech in this way or this other designer in a way. Before I commit to it and I put it in my design document or in my design, maybe I go and have a chat with those people and make sure that it's not, completely out of this world, or not feasible. So that's one way to do it. Then we have this like sort of formal peer review step where you can catch these things as a game designer. You read somebody else's design and you see, okay, this thing you put here does not fit with my plans. So we need to negotiate a little bit here. Then, I mean, there's only so much you can catch at that stage. The idea is to get everything in the game as soon as possible. That's why we have Alpha is a really good sort of milestone for that. And at Alpha, we start seeing how everything is coming together. And then I think what we also need to have, because we work on our very focused slices, it's very important to have these opportunities to sort of look at the big picture. Mm-hmm. So we have playtests for that. We have user tests, which are super interesting because you get to see players playing an experience from the beginning to end or whatever. is planned there. And I think also usually that's where the leads and the directors can also help give perspective, because they look at the big picture.
Right.
They also know what's coming from all the other disciplines or other teams that you're not really in touch with as much. So yeah, I think it's definitely not an easy job, but I think we have some things in place for it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's just fascinating to see it come together as a cohesive whole. Yeah. It's like, okay, so I have a crafting, and then I have to go get this monster, but somebody else is designing what the monster drops when I kill it, but I'm going to bring it into my crafting system.
There's a lot of, we're so dependent on each other. To me, this, like, making games is one of the most collaborative processes, like manufacturing processes that you can possibly imagine. Or maybe I'm like very biased because that's kind of what I know, but it feels like we have to be communicating and sort of in touch with each other so much that, yeah, it's definitely, and I mean, it doesn't come together from the beginning, right? No. That's the thing. Like, it doesn't. It takes a lot of iteration and work on the game to get to the point where it gels.
Yeah, alignment and iteration seems to be two of those keywords as well.
Yeah.
Iterate on something. But what do you think that a game designer, because you work in these teams, and there's not only teams of game designers, you have all these people that do actually building stuff as well. Like, what do you think the game designer's role is within the team as a whole?
So I think usually the step where you're trying to make a design happen is when you're going to get a lot more interaction with other disciplines, and you're going to try to sort of make sure that people understand what the design is about, and also that they can do it, that they feel like, this is something we can build. So I think it's this part of, like, implementation and iteration of the design that I think is where a lot of the magic happens, really. Because you have a plan, but then, of course, you start to get your hands dirty and, like, to get to it, and you're going to learn a lot from this. So we usually, try to get something in very quickly, what we call a first playable, to try to see, okay, is this plan even a good idea? And we do that together with other disciplines. And we need science and feedback. So we need UI, or we need UX. We need, we need a system that works. So we need code. We need maybe art. We need, so to prove that sort of initial fun.
Yeah.
And then when we feel good about it, we take it to this, like, full functionality step. So I think the role of the game designer here is manifold. one of the most important ones during this phase is problem solving.
Yeah.
And this is where I feel like, because you're in implementation and iteration for the longest duration of your game production, likely, for sure, actually, your role as a problem solver is probably the most important sort of role, or skill that you're going to use. At least from my experience, this is how I've seen it. And so you're always running into your plan is not going to work out. We know that already. You have to believe in it at the beginning to implement, but, like, it's not going to work out. So you have to like constantly problem solve together with the team. So this is another sort of role that I see, is like being an advocate of the game to the team, inviting basically your team to sort of participate in your process, participate in the design, participate in the problem solving, get their buy-in, get their input. And because the game design role is a lot more about picking the right idea than it is about making sure that you have the right idea or you have the solution to everything. So I think that's a very important role as well.
Because that's one thing I've been thinking of, I would say, with the championing the game with this in the team, is even if, like, everybody basically, or most people that work in a game, tend to play games. And I know, even myself, not being a game developer, I sit down and I play a game, then I'm gonna have opinions on the design of the game.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that as a game designer? Ends up what did they say? The buck ends with you? Like, or how does that work?
I think, there's clear ownership of the sort of design on the game designer, right? Like, on the design decisions. But you need to have a why for what you're doing.
Yep.
You need to be able to explain, if somebody wants to do something different from the team, You need to be able to explain, this is why we're doing what we're doing. But you also have to be open enough to hear another point of view and to hear another solution. And I think definitely the focus should be on what is it that will make for a better experience? What is it that is going to make for a better game, a more fun game, a better experience for the player? And that's your focus. That needs to be your aim. It doesn't need to be that I'm right or you're, you know what I mean? Or I'm the game designer. I have to decide, you know, that it says so in my job description. No, I think definitely listening, inviting people to have opinions, to criticize the game together, because we're gonna, you know, we're gonna be the best critics basically of our game when we develop it. So I think that's what I would say a game designer should do. Yeah. And I think if you know why you're doing things, you know, you can usually explain the intention at least. Yeah. It might not be the best solution that you're, and then, you know, you can get help from others.
But then we actually started bringing in that outside force that's just waiting, and that's the player.
Right.
What happens when the player comes in?
Yeah, what happens is it's not your game anymore. It is still kind of your game, but it's like it's their game just as much. So I think it's super interesting what happens. You learn so much about what actually, how your designs and plans played out. Of course, you know, you're confident in what you ship, hopefully. And, you know, you think it's fun and good, and it probably is a lot of the time. But, you know, they're going to do things with it that you couldn't have seen coming. No. Because it's usually so many players as well. And players are so skilled and so creative. And it's really very interesting. It's such a learning experience every time you ship, to see what actually happens with your systems. Them in isolation, but also where they meet. Yep. With the rest of the game. It's like, it's really great learning experience. And I think that's what was very interesting for me working on a live game for many years was having this opportunity, or working on sequels, having this opportunity to take that learning and actually improve the game. Right. And, you know, patch the game and make it better, or make a sequel and make sure that the sequel addresses those things that you've seen, is such a cool sort of opportunity. Right. So I think you're lucky as a game designer to have that opportunity, have another stab at it, and then see, okay. So you learn so much from that. So yeah, I think that's kind of what I would say happens. Yeah.
Another thing that's been coming up more and more, speaking about the player, you mentioned UX in passing before. Yeah. How's that affected your job? And questions like accessibility and stuff in games. How do you design around that? I think it's about the game designer's job and role to put themselves in the player's shoes. Yep. I think it's a very big part of, I think, what we do. Thinking about how is the player going to experience this thing that I'm making at the beginning, the first time I see it, 10 hours in, whatever. Mm-hmm. And then, so I think UX is a big part of that. And I think that's why it's becoming, a very big, important sort of discipline and area of game development. Just in case, UX,
user experience. Yeah. And in terms of accessibility, I think we're starting to make strides there. There's definitely a lot more awareness. There's a lot of games that are doing amazing things with it. So I think to me, it's about having that sort of ability to foresee and to understand the different types of players and how they interact with games in general, how they play them, what they need to be able to have fun, to be comfortable, to understand what's going on without feeling overwhelmed or I think it's definitely a big topic, at least for Ubisoft. I know for a fact it's something that we're focusing on a lot.
Yeah, plugging Ubisoft and Massive here. There's actually a mini documentary available on YouTube where you can see kind of how Massive's worked with accessibility in the past. This is really interesting. Yeah. So there's going to be a lot of people, as I said, like it's great to actually get more of a actual view of what a game designer do. But I know there's a lot of people out there that want to work with game design who are currently starting their interests or starting their careers. what advice would you have to me if I'm sitting at home thinking, hey, I'm going to be at a game designer. This sounds awesome.
Yeah, I would say go for it. I think depending on the different sort of aspects that we talked about, there's various things that I could think of that could be cool to do or would help to do. When it comes to like designing, I think in general, just playing a lot of games, of different games, and trying to reverse engineer them a little bit, like trying to see how they solved the problems they solved, and also why they did the things they did. Like trying to go to that sort of place of intention. What was the intention here? I think that can give you almost like a little toolbox of ready-made solutions that you can kind of draw from when you're trying to solve your own problems, or game design problems. So I don't think we need to be original and reinvent the wheel with absolutely every little thing that we're designing.
Right.
I think it's important to be able to have that sort of foundation and knowledge of like what's out there. How are people dealing with the various design problems in games? So I think that's one thing. I think for iteration and implementation, like getting an engine, like do things yourself as much as possible, try things out. For polish and balancing, very important. Watch the user tests. Really use, if you don't have a lab, get somebody to play. What we used to do they were called RIPs, rapid iterative tests. We just take a friend or take a colleague that is not really working closely what you're doing, have them play your feature, watch them play. Watching like a fresh mind play, I think is such an important, like good learning experience for how people are interacting with your systems, and you can get the tunnel vision and a little bit too used to your designs. For balancing specifically, like I've that question of like how when you're in school and you're taking some topic, or you're taking physics or you're taking math, like how is this going to help me in life? This is where I was like, okay, I have reached my math limits quite many times trying to do my job, which is very interesting. So yeah, I would say math is a good one. It's a good skill to have.
Because that's one of the views, like a cliche game designer sitting in front of Excel and just moving numbers around.
Yeah, there's a bit of that for sure. And I think, specifically for balancing, you want to make scenarios of like, how players are going to interact with your system, and you need to know probabilities and calculus pretty well and stuff like that. So I think it's kind of, don't underestimate that, I would say. Yes. What else? I think for UX, there are 2 books I can recommend that were recommended to me by people that work with UX at Ubisoft, and that's The Gamer's Brain and How We Learn. I don't remember the authors, but just Google it, I guess.
Links in the description.
Those, I think for accessibility, look at games that are really good benchmarks. I think Last of Us 2 is now kind of the benchmark. I also find it really valuable to watch streamers that cover accessibility. I think it's so interesting to see what they find useful, what solutions they think work and don't. For being sort of a champion of the game to your team, I think they're just, try to be a facilitator. Don't try to be the dictator, not in the, in the terms of like, I'm making all the decisions, but like try to facilitate the feature happening, or the system being built, or the game being put together. I would say that's, see it that way rather than the other way.
I was thinking now, because we talked a lot about fun in the beginning.
Yeah.
Random tip that dropped into my head is Raph Koster wrote a book called Theory of Fun, which is one of those like classic game design books.
Yeah.
It's short and really nice.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting. Takes you back to the basics quite.
Yeah. About learning and stuff.
I need to read that again. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's really good. You know what else is good?
What?
These.
Fika.
Sarah Barnhart.
We've earned it now.
I think so. You definitely. I'm just sitting here listening to you. But thank you so much for coming. And I think it's time for us to actually try these now. Is that
Okay, sounds great. Yeah, let's do it.
There's 4 of them. Gonna try not to eat. These are, wow.
There's a milk chocolate one and a dark chocolate one.
I'm not sure, you'll never see this. But it says Sour Bernhardt. You can't even get it out. What the? Okay. Is it hazelnut?
They also feel like a full meal. Really heavy.
Oh, good. Sorry. I'm gonna have chocolate all over my teeth now. But thank you so much for coming. It's been great.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Always. Thank you so much for joining our Fika today. We put a bunch of useful links in the description, so make sure to check those out if you want to learn more. Also, remember to like, subscribe, and all that fun stuff you do on the internet. Until next time, take care.